sister-in-law was laughing when I walked through the front door. Loud, comfortable laughter, like someone who'd already won. She stopped the second she saw my face. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, then at my brother, then at my parents sitting at their own kitchen table like guests who'd overstayed their welcome in someone else's house. That's when I knew I'd made the right call, driving 4 hours straight after work without stopping once. I need to back up. My parents have been married for 31 years. My dad worked nights at a print shop for most of my childhood. My mom cleaned office buildings twice a week on top of her day job at the school cafeteria. They never took vacations. They clipped coupons. They drove the same car for 14 years because they refused to take on a payment they weren't sure they could cover. They were the most financially careful people I've ever known, which made it all the more painful that by the time I was 25, they were still renting, still paying someone else's mortgage every month, still with nothing to show for all those years of careful, exhausting discipline. I'm 32 now. I work in supply chain, logistics, not glamorous. Not the kind of job that makes people's eyes light up at parties, but it pays well and I'm good at it. I've been promoted 3 times in 6 years. I don't spend a lot. I save obsessively, probably because I watched my parents count change for so long that frugality is basically encoded in me at this point. 2 years ago, I started quietly looking at properties. My parents had mentioned, maybe once or twice over the years, a lake community about 3 hours north of where we grew up. They'd driven through it on a road trip decades ago, and my mom had said something like, "Wouldn't it be something to live somewhere like this someday?" She probably forgot she said it. I never did. I found a 3-bedroom craftsman-style house on a quiet cul-de-sac in that exact community. It had a screened porch that looked out onto a small inlet, a wood-burning fireplace in the living room, and a kitchen with enough counter space that my mom, who has been cooking in cramped spaces her entire life, would actually have room to move. The asking price was $398,000. I'd been saving for 3 years with this specific goal in mind. I had enough for a full cash purchase if I pulled from everything: my house fund, my investment account, my emergency savings topped back up from my bonus the previous quarter. I sat with that decision for 2 weeks. Then I wired the funds. I structured the purchase carefully. The deed was in my name only, with a drafted agreement that transferred into a life estate for my parents, meaning they had the legal right to live there for the rest of their lives, but the property itself remained mine. I had an estate attorney draw it up. She walked me through every clause. I was not naive about this. I loved my parents, but I also understood that love without structure can become a mess very quickly, especially when siblings are involved. My brother is 4 years older than me. I'll be honest with you, he's always been the one my parents defended. Not maliciously. I think they just found him more fragile, more in need of protection, and they got into the habit of it when we were kids and never stopped. He borrowed money from them twice and repaid neither loan. His wife has never worked a job that lasted more than 8 months. They have 2 kids and a lifestyle that consistently outpaces what they actually earn. My parents have quietly floated them more times than I know about. I've only found out about some of it. He didn't know about the house purchase. No one did. I kept it completely to myself, partly because I wanted it to be a genuine surprise, and partly because I knew, on some level, that information like this, a paid-off property, a life estate, my parents set up without his involvement, would be received poorly. I planned the reveal for their anniversary weekend. I told my parents I was taking them on a little trip, packed their bags myself when I visited the week before, told them to dress comfortably. My mom kept asking where we were going. I kept saying, "You'll see." When we pulled into the driveway and I handed my mom the key, she didn't understand at first. She thought maybe I'd rented it for the weekend. I had to say it twice. "It's yours, Mom, to live in, for as long as you want." She sat down on the porch steps and cried for about 10 minutes. My dad walked through every room by himself. I could hear his footsteps going slowly from the bedroom to the bathroom to the kitchen and back again. When he came back out to the porch, his eyes were red and he couldn't say anything for a long moment. He just put his hand on my shoulder and kept it there. We spent 2 days settling them in. I'd hired someone to furnish it simply: beds made, towels hung, the kitchen stocked with the basics. My mom opened and closed every drawer in the kitchen. She stood at the window over the sink and looked at the backyard and didn't say anything for a while. I knew exactly what she was feeling. She was trying to believe it was real. I drove home Sunday evening feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, exactly. More like completion. Like a thing I'd promised myself quietly, without words, had finally been kept. My brother called me 8 days later. I was in the middle of a conference call and I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. Then his wife called from her number. I finished my meeting and called him back. "So," he said. "No greeting. You bought Mom and Dad a house." "I did," I said. "And you didn't think to mention it. It was a surprise." There was a pause, the kind that means someone is deciding which version of themselves to deploy. Mom and Dad shouldn't be in a situation where one kid has this kind of leverage over them. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because I've replayed it a lot. He said several things in that conversation. He said the house should have been purchased jointly, or at least that he should have been consulted. He said a life estate was a controlling arrangement. He said, and this is the part that stayed with me, that my parents deserved to own their home outright, not to owe me anything, which would have been a reasonable argument if he had offered to contribute a single dollar to making that happen. He hadn't. He didn't offer then, either. I told him the legal arrangement was already in place, the attorney had reviewed everything, and our parents were protected and comfortable. He said he was going to talk to his own attorney. I said that was his right. We hung up. I told myself it would blow over. 6 weeks later, my mom called me sounding strange, quieter than usual. She said my brother and his wife had been visiting a lot. She said they'd been talking about how much the property might be worth. She said his wife had mentioned, more than once, what a good investment it was. I drove up the following weekend without telling anyone I was coming. I'm not someone who acts on impulse. I planned this out on the 4-hour drive. I stopped once for coffee and to make 2 phone calls, one to my estate attorney, one to the property manager for the HOA community, who I'd already introduced myself to when we first moved my parents in. I explained the situation briefly to each of them. My attorney reminded me of exactly what the documents said. The HOA manager said he'd had a conversation that week with a man asking questions about the property, how it was titled, whether the owners were looking to sell, how the resale process worked in that community. That man was my brother. I pulled into the driveway at 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday. My brother's SUV was in the driveway next to my parents' car. I could hear voices from outside before I even got to the porch. My sister-in-law was the first to see me. She was in the middle of laughing at something. When she registered who I was, the laugh just stopped, like a light switch. My brother stood up from the couch. My mom was in the armchair across from him, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as relieved. My dad was in the kitchen doorway. He looked exhausted. "We were just talking about you," my brother said. "I heard," I said. I hadn't, literally, but I figured it was close enough to true. I sat down. I didn't perform anger. I've found over the years that the quieter you are in moments like this, the more it unsettles people who expected a fight. My sister-in-law started talking about how they were just exploring options for my parents' future, about how it would be better for everyone if the property were in my parents' names outright. She used the word equity 4 times in 3 minutes. She talked about their kids, my niece and nephew, and how it would be nice for the family to have a real asset to pass down. I let her finish. Then I opened my bag and put the legal documents on the coffee table. I didn't need to say much. The estate attorney had summarized everything clearly on the cover page. My name on the deed. The life estate language. The clause that specified the property could not be sold, transferred, borrowed against, or listed without my written consent, and a 90-day notice period. I'd added that last part specifically after a conversation with my attorney, in which I described my family dynamic, and she said, Then we should put language in that addresses exactly this. My brother picked up the documents. I watched him read. I watched his jaw tighten. This is controlling, he said. This is protective, I said. There's a difference. His wife tried a different angle. She said that I was clearly doing well financially and that it wouldn't hurt me to be generous to the whole family. I said I had been generous to the whole family, specifically to my parents. She said that was a narrow way to define family. I said it was the accurate one. My dad spoke up then. He doesn't talk much when emotions are running high. That's always been his way. But he said, quietly, she paid for this. She planned this for years. This is what she chose to do. My brother turned to him. You don't think it's a problem that she can take it back whenever she wants? My dad looked at him for a long moment. She could have done nothing, he said. She chose to do this instead. That was the end of the conversation, more or less. My brother and his wife left about 40 minutes later. My sister-in-law didn't say goodbye to me on the way out. The door closed and the house got quiet. My mom made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. She looked older to me in that moment than she ever had before, and I realized she'd been carrying this tension for weeks, probably trying to manage both sides, probably blaming herself for some of it the way she always does. How long have they been coming up? I asked. Almost every weekend, she said. I wrapped both hands around my mug. Did they ever ask you what you wanted? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, they asked if we'd thought about the future. I nodded. I didn't push it further. The next morning before I left, I called the HOA manager and gave him written authorization via email from my attorney's letterhead, confirming that no inquiries about the property should be entertained from anyone other than me. I changed the access code on the exterior keypad. My parents knew the new one, my brother didn't. I also added my contact information as the primary owner on file with the community association, so any future questions would come to me directly. Not because I wanted to control my parents, because I knew what was coming if I didn't create a clear perimeter. My brother texted me that afternoon. He said what I'd done was hostile. I read the message, thought about responding, and decided not to. I forwarded it to my attorney's file instead. Over the following month, things were tense in the way that family things are tense. Not explosive, just present. He didn't call me. I didn't call him. My parents were careful not to mention him when we talked. I was careful not to ask. Then, about 6 weeks after that Saturday, my mom called me in the evening and she sounded different. Lighter. She told me she and my dad had had a conversation with my brother. She didn't give me the details and I didn't ask for them. What she told me was that they'd made clear, for the first time in probably a very long time, what they actually wanted, which was to live quietly, without pressure, without being asked to make decisions that benefited other people's financial futures. She said my dad had done most of the talking. She said she was proud of him. I cried a little after I hung up. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I went up to visit the next month with groceries and a peach cobbler from a bakery they like. My mom was in the garden when I arrived. She'd started one in the side yard, tomatoes and herbs, something she'd always said she wanted but never had space for. My dad was on the screened porch with a book. The lake inlet caught the afternoon light and the whole scene looked, I thought, like something from a catalog for a life well lived. I sat with them for most of the day. We didn't talk about my brother. We talked about whether to get a bird feeder, about my dad's new puzzle hobby, about the neighbors 2 doors down who'd brought over a welcome casserole back in October and turned out to be lovely. Before I drove home, I stood at the kitchen window for a minute while my parents were in the other room. The counter was full of things: a small plant my mom had picked up somewhere, a dish towel printed with cardinals, a coffee maker with the timer set, all the small accumulated evidence of people who had finally, genuinely settled in. I thought about all the years they'd made it work in places that weren't theirs. All the times my mom had said she didn't want to get too attached because you never know how long you'll stay. All the times my dad had fixed something himself because calling a landlord felt like an imposition. This was theirs. Not on paper. On paper, it's still mine. And I made that decision deliberately, and I'd make it again. But in every way that matters to how a person lives their day, this was theirs. A week later, my brother sent me a short email. He said he wanted to talk at some point, that he'd been thinking, that he understood I'd done something significant, and that he hadn't responded to it well. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something I hadn't expected from him, and I read it 3 times. I wrote back 2 days later. I said I was open to talking. I said I didn't have expectations for how that conversation would go, but that I wasn't interested in relitigating the past, only in figuring out what made sense going forward. I kept it short. We haven't talked yet. That's okay. Some things take longer than others to get to. What I know is this. I didn't buy my parents a home to hold it over anyone. I did it because they spent 30-odd years handing everything they had to other people, to their jobs, to their kids, to landlords, and they deserved at some point to have something handed back. I did it because I could, and because no one else was going to. The structure I put in place wasn't about control. It was about making sure that what I gave couldn't be taken. There's a version of generosity that's really just a vulnerability, handing something precious to someone and trusting that no one will reach for it. I didn't do that version. I did the version where the gift is protected, where my parents can't be pressured into decisions they don't want to make, where the home I gave them stays a home and doesn't become a transaction. A boundary isn't a punishment. It isn't a wall. It's just a line that says, this thing I built with care is going to stay the way I built it. My parents call me every Sunday evening now. Usually my mom first, then she hands the phone to my dad. He tells me about the puzzle he finished, or the bird he saw on the porch railing, or the casserole the neighbor brought. My mom tells me about the garden. Last week she said the tomatoes are almost ready. I keep coming back to something my dad said in that room in front of my brother and his wife when the air was tight and nobody was sure what was going to happen next. He said, she could have done nothing. She chose to do this instead. That's the whole story, really, not just mine, anyone's. The choices we make when no one is watching, when there's no applause and no guarantee things will go the way we hope. Those are the choices that end up defining what kind of person we actually are. I didn't buy that house because I wanted recognition. I bought it because I'd watched my parents work themselves down to the bone for 30 years and I had the means to give them something back. The right thing to do was obvious. What took discipline was actually doing it, saving for 3 years, keeping it quiet, not spending the money on something easier and more immediately satisfying. That's the part people don't see when they hear a story like this. They see the moment I walked through the door. They don't see the 3 years of packed lunches and skipped vacations and spreadsheets on Sunday mornings and the legal structure. I know that part probably surprised some people. It surprised my brother, that's for sure. But I want to be clear about why I did it that way. It wasn't to control my parents. It was because I thought it through. I'd looked at my family honestly, not through the lens of who I wanted everyone to be, but through the lens of who they'd actually shown me they were. My brother had borrowed money from my parents twice and never paid it back. His wife had spent years viewing my parents' resources as something that existed, at least partially, for their benefit. I didn't need a crystal ball to see what might happen if I handed over a $398,000 property with no protective language in place. I needed a good attorney and a clear head. Intelligence isn't just book knowledge, it's the willingness to see a situation clearly and plan accordingly, even when the clear-eyed version is uncomfortable. What stayed with me most, though, is my mom in that kitchen the morning after everything happened. She was quiet. She'd been managing both sides for weeks, absorbing tension from every direction, doing what she'd always done, trying to keep the peace in a room where peace had become expensive. When I asked if my brother had ever asked what she actually wanted, she didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. People who have good values don't just think about what's right. They follow through, even when it costs something. And people who lack that, who reach for things they didn't earn, who reframe greed as fairness, eventually run into the natural consequence of their own behavior. My brother didn't lose anything that was ever truly his. He lost access to something he'd convinced himself he was owed. That's a different thing entirely, and the difference matters. I'm not angry at him. I don't think I ever really was. I think I was just tired of watching people who work hard and ask for little get quietly taken advantage of by people who've never had to develop that kind of character because someone always cushioned the fall. My parents deserved the cushion for once, and I was in a position to give it to them. So I did. The tomatoes my mom planted are almost ready. She called to tell me that last week. That's what I think about when I wonder if any of it was worth it. It was worth it.